First of all, I wanted to thank you for your inputs about your experience in Afghanistan. I realized there are so many common words between your language and the Arabic language. I was very impressed. I come from Lebanon. I'm a member of the faculty here, and one of the courses I teach is post-conflict recovery and reconstruction, and the role of women as main actors in conflict and post-conflict. I myself was raised during the conflict. I was an IDP twice in Lebanon, and I was a refugee once, and I was displaced to Syria. And ironically, today we have the Syrians in Lebanon as refugees, unfortunately. And we realized how much the health sector is very crucial, mainly in the post-conflict interventions. And today, our panelists here will be highlighting the role of health as a security priority for women and nation. It's my pleasure to introduce our panelists. Let me start first with Dr. Kathleen O'Reilly. She's a feminist geographer with extensive water, sanitation, and hygiene experience in urban and rural India. She studies drinking water supply systems management and the impact of sanitation interventions for marginal groups, particularly women and lower castes. Her career spans over 20 years of data collection, research findings, dissemination, and teaching. She would like to be able, because she's now a full professor, but she would like to write a book that will document through oral histories the lives of the individuals that she have come to know over the many years and the changing circumstances of their lives due to the development interventions like WASH projects. She strongly believes that water supply, sustainability, and latrine usage depends on social, political, environmental, and economic factors. Our second panelist is Sarah Evans. Sarah began her career as a securities lawyer, but launched her career in international development as the founder of Well Aware. It's an Austin-based nonprofit working with impoverished communities to establish safe and sustainable water infrastructure as a foundation for prosperity. Today, she has become a subject matter expert and has published several articles on international development, nonprofit management, women issues, and water system success on various platforms, including mariashriver.com. Our third panelist is Jacob Allen. He is Managing Director of Cicero Social Impact, which partners with mission-driven leaders to maximize their impact through strategy, monitoring and evaluation, performance management, and donor and beneficiary analytics. He has worked with dozens of clients in the US and worldwide, mainly Prudential, the George W. Bush Institute, the Clinton Foundation, and many more. Today, he currently serves on the international board of Mary's Meals, which provides a daily meal in school to over 1 million children living in desperate poverty. And finally, our panel moderator, she's Dr. Brandie DePaoli Taylor, and she is today the director of the program in reproductive and child health at the School of Public Health. She joined she joined TAMU. I'm so taken by the Bush School. She joined Texas A&M University in 2014, and her focused research is to identify biological markers that may be used to build prediction models for common reproductive and pregnancy complications. Please join me in welcoming our panelists.
Thank you, Silva, for that glowing introduction. I'm going to give my talk standing up because there's no way I can talk about this and keep my seat in my seat. So first of all, thank you to the Bush School and to Valerie Hudson for the invitation to speak to you. Thank you very much for showing up. So as Silva mentioned, I've been studying women, water supply, and sanitation in urban and rural India for 20 years. Most recently, I've been studying the relationship between the absence of usable sanitation facilities and its impacts on women's physical security and stress levels. Based on my own research and the work of feminist water sanitation and hygiene scholars and practitioners, my goal today is to convince you that gender equality is fundamental to eliminating practices of open defecation. Approximately 1.1 billion people practice open defecation worldwide, most of them in South Asia. India alone accounts for 647 million of the world's open defecators. The prevalence of open defecation has serious consequences, including loss of life, loss of health, and loss of wages due to illness. Governments like India have been working for decades to end open defecation, with little success. For women and girls specifically, limited sanitation access and poor sanitation conditions can influence their physiological and mental health. Women feel shame when they are going to defecate or going to manage their periods. They must navigate the weather, the terrain, and landowners as part of finding a place that they can use. They experience sexual violence, assaults, and harassment while commuting to and from defecation sites, or while accessing public latrines near their homes in the dark. As a woman in Jaipur, India told us, the threat is always there, meaning that whether or not something happens, she is always afraid. When safe, usable toilets are not available, when open defecation is preferable to an existing toilet, women face what I call toilet insecurity. The term toilet insecurity has multiple meanings. The first insecurity is the material reality for many women that they do not have access to a toilet, either at home or in their community. The second toilet insecurity is having access to a community toilet, but one that is inadequate or one that a woman cannot use safely. The third meaning of toilet insecurity captures the uncertainties surrounding a woman's daily need to go for open defecation if she does not have a toilet. Every day, she faces the unknown as she makes her way to the places she uses to relieve herself. And finally, toilet insecurity also includes a woman's inability to tell anyone if an incident occurs, out of fear of repercussions for herself or her family. As a newly married woman told us, after the assault, I did not tell my husband. I did not want to start a fight. She expected to be blamed for what had happened. Inadequate sanitation includes too few public toilets, poor quality, poor design, no locks on doors, lack of cleanliness and management, insufficient lighting, and other infrastructural factors that render an existing toilet unusable to women. Having access to a toilet does not ensure freedom from attack or fear of violence and harassment if toilet conditions are unsafe or so disagreeable that they force women to defecate in the open. Open defecation sites are typically 5 to 20 minutes away. The foundation of toilet insecurity is due to gender, a relationship of constructed difference and subsequent inequality between men and women. An understanding of gender as created through ongoing social processes can initiate a transformation of toilet insecurity from women's problem to a gendered problem, from toilet building targets to social change. Many current sanitation policies recognize that women have specific sanitation and hygiene needs. For example, squatting is a vulnerable physical position, and menstruation means a need for privacy to manage flow and bodily hygiene. Women's toilet insecurity, however, does not stem from their biology any more than men are biologically wired to commit acts of violence against women. Sanitation policy currently recognizes gender, but all too often, gender means women, and not the unequal relationship that favors men over women, boys over girls, and is reproduced on a daily basis through social institutions like dowry, schools, laws, divisions of labor, etc. Toilet insecurity hinges on the fear, shame, embarrassment, and discomfort women experience due to inadequate sanitation. However, women's physical insecurity and psychosocial stress is not only due to lack of sanitation. It is caused by gendered relationships that place women in subordinate relationship to men. Because in most societies they do not have the same de jure and de facto rights as men and boys, an absence of adequate sanitation increases women's vulnerability due to constraints on their ability to speak out and demand justice. The lack of adequate sanitation in the first place may be taken as an indicator of gender inequality. The absence of a household toilet may signal that women are not decision makers, nor do they control finances at the household scale. Since men are both the least likely to use toilets and the controllers of household income, they are also the least likely to be convinced that a toilet is a good investment. As a woman said to us in an interview in Tamil Nadu, India, "If we want to construct a toilet in the house, the men say that it is not important." Urban governments make decisions that give women less access to public sanitation facilities than men, sending a message about low expectations for women's participation in the public sphere. Women are underrepresented in government almost universally, and male-dominated decision-making bodies are often gender blind when it comes to sanitation. That is, they do not consider women's and men's different sanitation needs when planning and budgeting. Over the life course, women and girls living in places with inadequate sanitation experience toilet insecurity differently. They have different experience based on their rank in social hierarchies of class, caste, religion, ethnicity, and occupation, their status in their natal or marital households, and their physical abilities. Their experiences of inadequate sanitation change as girls grow up and women grow old, moving through life stages. Women and girls discipline their bodies so that the need to defecate comes at the appropriate time. They restrict their eating, limit their fluid consumption, and sacrifice sleep, to name a few examples. In our recent research, 80% of women surveyed modified their behavior in some way in response to stress. What's more, we found that the more stress women experienced, the more modifications they made to their behaviors. Which raises the feminist question: how did women's high levels of stress come to be acceptable to the people and communities that surround them? How did women's high levels of stress come to be acceptable to the people and the communities that surround them? This question is not rhetorical. It is an answerable question about social processes that create inequalities. And it is a question that must be answered because women's high stress levels do not come from not having a latrine. They come from what they fear when they have to go out for open defecation. They come from the restrictions they must put on their bodies. And they come from having to hide what men have deemed should not be seen, like their menstrual blood. Answering the question is critical to any future planning, policy, and programming in the sanitation sector that seeks changes in the gender status quo. National sanitation policy is fundamental to subsequent decisions at lower levels of government. Sanitation policies drive programming and budgeting, making their contents key to creating toilet security. Additionally, research and analysis of project outcomes are essential so that gendered sanitation policy is improved through a repeating process of implementation and evaluation. The questions must be repeatedly asked. Is women's toilet security better than it was before? For whom is it better, worse, or unchanged? So to put forward a theory of change in a toilet security frame, first, empowering women is both the means and the end to toilet insecurity. Women and girls have a right to toilet security. And 3, sanitation projects must be accountable to women and girls. Sanitation programming must build on women and girls' access to resources, skills, and sense of inner capability. Funding is necessary for initiatives that foster women and girls' rights. Sanitation policy has the potential to change gender relations, attitudes, and norms if women and girls' particular needs are part of a conversation about toilet security, that is, beyond a conversation that fails to connect toilets to gendered inequality and violence. Toilet security cannot occur unless gendered inequalities are prioritized above sanitation. Such a statement may seem ridiculous or radical or dangerous given the size of the open defecation problem and the havoc it wreaks on health, wealth, and life. But is it? When research makes clear that sanitation provision alone cannot eradicate open defecation. For that to occur, we must target women's toilet insecurity. We must turn the focus away from building toilets toward tackling the gender inequalities that produce toilet insecurity. Thank you.
Am I mic'd? Can you everybody hear me okay? I'm not on. I'll use this one. How about now? Yeah, great. Okay, well, first and foremost, I'm ridiculously honored to be here. So thank you so much for including me. I want to just introduce myself a little bit, and then I'm going to play a video for you guys just to have an overview of the kind of work that I'm involved with. I have been working after I was an attorney for a few years. I've been working in the clean water development sector in developing countries for the past 10 years. I was born in Australia in a very rural place, in a community of people that lived off the land. We did not have running water. We did not have electricity. We did move to the United States when I was 5, and I grew up in a small town in East Texas, just about an hour and a half from here. So I sort of had this foundation of and the knowledge of sort of, you know, the basic necessities and basic humanity, but I really didn't have any idea that I would end up doing the work that I do now. I'm going to talk a little bit more about exactly the sort of clean water infrastructure work we do. I will start first, though, by playing this video. I was recently able to be a part of Toyota's Mother of Invention program, and they created this video for our work. And I think I can figure this out. Maybe?
So.
I know, that's why I couldn't find it.
And then
Passwords. Okay. Thank you. Almost 1 billion people in the world, almost 1 out of every 7 of us, do not have access to clean drinking water. Without clean water, girls don't go to school. Women have to walk all day to get water. There's no chance for agriculture. There can be no health clinic. Without clean water, there is no prosperity for a community. Water is the beginning and the foundation of anything and everything. Well Aware is a nonprofit organization that is providing sustainable, clean water systems in East Africa. I started out in my professional career as a lawyer, and I was recruited to help on a project in Kenya to replace some of the livestock that were dying in this village. And I proposed that we drill a water well to help to mitigate the problem that we were trying to address. There was this one little girl who was following me around in the field when we were drilling, and when we finally hit water and there was water just spewing out of the ground, it was incredible. She was saying to me, "Maji, Maji," which means water in Swahili. And I picked her up and held her and gave her the water, and she drank it in just one big gulp. It was that trip in that moment that inspired me to drop everything else and work on this work. I had to sell the house, I sold my car, I gave up what had been my life plan up until that point to do this work. I just knew it could work, and I knew it needed to work. Hi, honey. Being a single mom is not easy for anybody. I start to talk to her a couple weeks before I leave and let her know where I'm going, and we look at where mommy's gonna be. And we're talking about the water wells and how people don't have water. And she said, "But Mommy, I can go too. I have a shovel. I can help you dig." I was doing this work before I had a daughter. I was not on one of our trips because she had just been born. It hit me like a ton of bricks. Just this flood of emotion, because I could not imagine not being able to feed my child. I could not imagine wondering whether or not what I was providing for her was going to make her sick. So that was it for me. When we go into new communities, we do see that there's also incredible need for education intervention or agricultural training, gender equality education. But we know that none of that can be done until there is a source of clean water available in the community. We worked in a northern region of Kenya called Isiolo.
My name is Sarah, and we are from Austin, Texas.
Collaboration is so important, be they local government offices, the drilling contractors, the suppliers, and then other NGOs. From the very beginning to the handoff of the water system, it's collaboration every step of the way. Yay! We see disease rates drop like almost overnight once we have clean water in a community. So that's the reward.
When Sarah goes to Africa, she embeds herself in the community. She's literally getting in the mud, in the water, in the communities, in the village.
Innovation is very important to the work that we do. We have our finger on the pulse of technology. Oftentimes electricity isn't even available, and solar is the cheapest to install, and then is almost maintenance free and is completely cost free for the community. The system should last at least 20 or 30 years. My favorite part of my job is going back into communities to be able to see the changes that are happening. Being a mother of invention, it's a huge honor for me, and I get really excited when I get to be a part of something that will help us spread awareness.
Stop this.
So thanks for watching that. It's kind of amazing the kind of video assets you can have with a little corporate backing. So just want to make sure that's not going to keep playing. Pushing pause. So when I first got into this work, I quickly realized that when I was going into communities and learning about what their plans for development are and what their obstacles had been, it was difficult for me to have conversations with the men in the community. And they would answer my questions, but they would look past me to the men in the group to answer them. And so I started spending a lot of time with the women and taking walks and having tea. And that's when I really started to learn what was going on in the community and where they needed support and where the extra resources that we could plug in would come from. And so I created this relationship with the women that it became the foundation of the success of our work and the sustainability of our work. And the reason the women were so inclined to tell me what was really happening and what they needed to thrive and to have their children thrive is because they're the ones that literally carry the burden of getting clean water back to their communities. And these are just some images of our work. So just some statistics, which I bet most of you have already heard. I'm gonna give you some of these stats, and then I'm also gonna occasionally give you some examples of how we have been able to change these statistics, just to underscore the fact that there can be change, and we are making some progress. So globally, women and girls are the primary water collectors for their families. In African countries, women are 5 times more likely than men to collect drinking water for the household. Every day, women and children around the globe spend 200 million hours collecting water. I know that you've seen the jerry cans full of water. I think some of our pictures include the jerry cans. They weigh 40 pounds each, and sometimes women are carrying more than one. The children carry them too. This is really detrimental to health, and women spend hours and hours a day collecting water instead of being able to start their own businesses, further nurture their families, and have healthy families. Access to enough good quality water is vital to protecting pregnant women from serious disease such as hepatitis. Giving birth in places with inadequate drinking water, sanitation facilities, and poor management of medical waste increases the risk of disease and death for the mother and her baby. Women who carry heavy water containers on their head, hip, or back can experience many physical issues, including pelvic deformities that may result in childbirth problems. 70% of the world's blind, and this surprised me too, this is one I learned recently, 70% of the world's blind are women who have been infected directly or through their children with trachoma, and that's the blindness that's caused by bacterial infection in the eye from lack of sanitation. Women and girls living without a toilet spend 266 million hours each day finding a place to go. Many women only use the restroom at night because there isn't a safe place for them to use the restroom. This increases the risk of assault, sexual harassment, and animal attacks. Many girls drop out of school during puberty because there aren't separate toilets and washing facilities and sanitary napkin disposal places, which Kathleen explained to us much more thoroughly. One of the communities that we worked in the northern region of Kenya, called Jaba, we entered the community for the first time. The only source of clean water they had was an open hand-dug water well that the children in this tiny little dilapidated school were climbing down into to get water and bring back out. So the water was horribly unsanitary, but it was also very, very dangerous for the children. When we installed a community-wide water system, now these are the deep water wells that supply water to thousands of people that are solar-powered, submersible pumps. Now the population of that community was 3,000. It's now 9,000 people. And the girls are going to school in the 8th grade for the first time in the entire region. There's now a health clinic in the area, and there are several more classroom blocks. It's not to say that that magically appeared once we put in the water system. We worked very hard with the communities to help them plan out their development, but it was remarkable to see what they were able to do once they had that point of clean water. And it's not an isolated incident. We're seeing that in almost all of our 47 communities that we're working in East Africa right now. A 15-minute reduction in water collection time increases the proportion of girls attending school by almost 12%. That is incredible. So just getting the water point, a clean water point, even just closer to a school or facility will increase the attendance in school by 12%. In sub-Saharan Africa, women spend 40 billion hours a year collecting water. That's the equivalent to a year's worth of labor in the entire French workforce. In India, there are 62% more drinking water projects in areas with female-led councils. Well aware, we make sure that we're helping the community, if they need help, organize a water committee, and we also encourage that at least half of the water committee members be women, and the projects are always more successful when that is the case. Women's involvement in the planning, financing, and upkeep of community water projects makes the project 6 to 7 times more effective. And increasing women's access to clean water would free up hundreds of hours annually that could be devoted to more valuable and economically beneficial pursuits. In another one of our communities in Kenya called Alamak, where we also installed a water system about 5 years ago, they had never done any kind of agriculture or crops in that area before. Once we had the water point and we partnered with another NGO for some agricultural training and guidance, the women have more than 2 acres now of their own crops. Now these are the women's crops. The men are not allowed on the property, and they're selling the crops and they're bringing in funding for their families. And they're also replacing some of the time that they got to spend together getting water in the farms and in the crops. And it's just a beautiful thing to see when you drive up. So I think that it might seem a little bit ridiculous that I'm standing up here talking about what's been working well in Kenya and Tanzania. And I loved what the Ambassador Russell said about, how we can be a part of this work and how we can help to make a difference. And I'm nothing remarkable. I grew up in a small town in East Texas, and I just found something that I was good at and that really called to me. And so I like to be an example for that you don't really have to be anything special. Just find something that you're good at and that you care about. And now I get to work with other women, and I get to empower them, and I get to empower my team. We have a staff of 9, and we only have 1 man, bless his heart. And I get to empower my daughter. And so I don't feel, I did feel powerless for about a decade when I was practicing law. Maybe that had something to do with my career. But I felt powerless. And now just the fact that I get to be a part of this work and connect with other women and represent them and be an example for my daughter, I'm incredibly grateful. And I'm grateful to be here. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Is this still on? Can you hear me okay? Great. It is a pleasure for me to be here. I am deeply humbled, and I should start by getting the desktop ready. Just one moment. Okay, great. I am very, very humbled to be here amidst all of you. Thank you very much to the Bush School and the George W. Bush Institute for the opportunity to be here. I couldn't help but notice I am the first man today to speak officially. I don't think I will do that justice, but it's an opportunity to be here. I have the opportunity to work with a wide variety of organizations over the course of my career, and as I've been reflecting upon that just today, it's been clear that there's a theme that I should have noticed earlier, which is the focus on women and the good that women do, and something I've seen clearly many, many times over, starting with my early work in microfinance. Ambassador Russell mentioned earlier that, and others know that when you put women in charge of their businesses and their finances, it goes much further in terms of household education and health and well-being, and back into the business, and more so than with men. Later, I had the opportunity to do graduate work, research work in southern Mexico with families whose family members had been migrants to the United States, and the vast majority of those individuals were women, women-led households, who were receiving remittances back into their communities, and who were changing their communities despite desperate situations. Over the course of a consulting career, I've had an opportunity to work with a wide variety of organizations, one of which was 10,000 Women, which is an initiative run by the Goldman Sachs Foundation that has trained well over 10,000 women, entrepreneurs in developing countries, to grow their businesses, to generate greater income from themselves, their families, and their communities, and to create jobs. And now I'm excited to be able to share with you a little bit about an organization called Mary's Meals. And Mary's Meals is an organization I've been involved with for the last 5 years or so. And now I'm on the board of directors. And it's an organization that, as was mentioned in the bio, now feeds 1.2 million children every single day a meal in their school, in their place of education. So just imagine the logistics of that, doing that, what kind of operation that would take here in College Station, excuse me. And then imagine doing that in the rural areas of India and Haiti and Malawi and Liberia and many other places. But before I get into that, I want to just summarize again a little bit of the issues that women and girls and then general communities in poverty deal with when it comes to two key issues, health and education. So the first is with respect to educational access and attainment. I think these are statistics that you'll likely all know. That in the last 40 years, there has in fact been tremendous improvement in terms of girls' access to education and attainment once they get into school. Increases in terms of hundreds of millions of girls and girls now are able to go to school, whereas they didn't before. And yet, there are still many, many who do not. Recent UNESCO data suggests that there are 160 million girls who are out of school. Interestingly, the majority of those are in the upper secondary levels. So there's one statistic I'll show in a moment. I should have put this earlier in the slide, that says that 75% of girls begin primary school, but 8% graduate secondary school. So while girls are getting in, which is very encouraging, there's still significant challenges to progressing through and attaining secondary education. There obviously are millions of children, millions of these kids who will never go to school. And that is disproportionately high, perhaps not surprisingly, but sadly, for girls. In sub-Saharan Africa, there are 9 million girls who will never go to school today, compared to 6 million boys who will never go to school, and similar, actually even greater disproportions in Asia. At the same time, hunger and nutrition is obviously an issue, and we've heard some of the ways in which that is manifested. Malnutrition is the root cause of at least 3.1 million deaths among children every year. That statistic means that there are more people that die from hunger and hunger-related causes than the combination of AIDS, malaria, and tuberculosis. And yet it's not something that, unless there's a massive famine or something like that, that gets as much attention because it is so pervasive. If you calculate that down, that means that 8,500 children will die today because they did not have adequate nutrition. If that were to occur here in College Station, the entire student population of Texas A&M would be dead in a week and a half. And that's a very large institution, right? So this issue is obviously incredibly difficult and problematic. At the same time, at the same time, there are many children who do survive and do get into school, and yet they're significantly affected by the ability to study and progress through school because they are hungry. Those of you who have children, I have 6 myself, and the idea of sending my children to school every day without a school lunch is not thinkable for me. The idea that they would be able to, have plenty of other worries in terms of how they're going to do and whether they're going to focus and what they're going to focus on, and the idea that they didn't have any food to help them through that process would be very, very discouraging to me. And yet that is what many children face throughout the world. And these efforts, these issues have significant effects. We've heard a version of this already, this proverb that when you educate a man, you educate one person. If you educate a woman, you educate a nation. Girls who complete secondary school are 6 times less likely to marry as children. Every additional year of secondary school increases a girl's future earnings by 10 to 20%. And each additional year of mother's education decreases the probability of infant mortality by 5 to 10%, which I thought was fascinating. And so everyone, I think, in this room all know and believe these issues and the need to address them. So let me share a little bit about what Mary's Meals is doing as one example of the many great things that are happening around the world. Mary's Meals works in areas of desperate poverty. It identifies a town or a village or a community or cluster of existing schools in places that are usually in rural areas that do not have food and meals within their school, in which their poverty or nutrition and hunger is a significant issue. It then creates a community council and or builds on top of one that already exists and says, how are you going to address this issue? If we provide some resources, what is going to happen? And that community collaboration establishes processes and ownership over the resources that are provided to provide food and to prepare them every single day. And as a result, part of Mary's Meals work includes almost 100,000 volunteers who prepare food in their villages every day. Usually it's mothers or teachers or others who are coming, often walking significant distances, to prepare these meals every single day. As a result of this catalyst opportunity, clearly other things are also very important. So in order to create the porridge, you need water. And so many cases, there are other organizations with whom Mary's Meals partners with, and often driven by requests by the community itself, that bring in water for the first time or specifically to the school site. In other cases, it also creates change in ways you might not expect. When enrollment goes up so quickly, suddenly the school size and the number of teachers aren't adequate. And that creates problems for a while, but usually it's resolved as the schools get more teachers and better facilities to provide education to their kids. And so there's this catalytic effect that happens when meals are provided, when water is accessible, and then when kids come to school. Some of the interesting effects that I could share about this with you. One of the volunteers, again, by volunteer, it's an individual who says, I care so much about my children's future, and I want them to get an education, that I'm going to work for several hours a day to make these meals. Now, since there's no porridge, you can't even ask the children to come to school. They wash themselves and rush to come to school. In a recent impact evaluation, compared to a control group, enrollment increased by percentage points greater than the control group studies. 93% of teachers attribute that growth in enrollment to the presence of Mary's Meals and that food that's provided in school. And this is wonderful, I think, that whereas on the yellow is the the control group study results, there was literally almost no change in terms of the number of kids who felt hungry at school. In fact, there was an increase. Just by the provision of a relatively small meal, those kids are now going through school and staying in school, not only during the school day, from morning until the end of the school day, but from one year to the next, because they are no longer hungry. So time is short, but I wanted to share one specific example of how that is playing out in Malawi.
I lost my father when I was 11 months old, and my mother when I was 8 years old. You don't have someone to comfort you when you're sad, because my mother used to comfort me when I was sad. I never chatted with my father because he died when I was very young. But my mother, I miss her so much. It was hard. It's a hard life. When you're hungry, you cannot be able to think. I used to go to school without food. Receiving Mary's meal changed my performance in class. After receiving Mayor's meal, I was going to class with a full stomach, so I was active and be able to listen to what the teacher is saying. I'm studying education in business studies. Education is important because when you're educated, you have power. People do not take advantage of you. I want to be independent one day, to do my things in a way I like. I want to have my own money and to live my own life, good life. I have been a nobody enough. I keep on working hard so that I'll be somebody.
I have been a nobody enough. It's a privilege to be able to work with an organization and with people who provide opportunities for girls to increase the parity in educational opportunities so that it's not just about a meal or about a well or about even attending school, but as I think we all know and believe, that it's about the people and about who they are and can become and the change that they can create in their own lives, in their lives of their families and communities and their nations. Thank you.
All right, thank you to our panelists. I know we got a late start. I'm hoping, can we still have 10 minutes? Yes, or 10 minutes. Okay, 10 minutes for discussion. So I just wanted to first ask if any of the panelists, do you have any strategies you can share for when you face opposers to the programs that you're trying to implement in these communities? I know, Sarah, you mentioned that sometimes when you would speak to the men in the community, they were looking past you. So I don't know if you have any.
Yeah, I'm not sure if this is working. Yeah. Yes, so there's lots of obstacles in the work that we do, and getting past the the gender dynamic and inequality is one of many, and it's still something that I struggle with, having been doing this work for 10 years, and but it's possible, and I think that we learn more and more about how to navigate these situations, and we get more and more feedback from the women and the children in these communities to be able to truly hear them and understand their desires and their plans for development. Though we're still learning, always.
I don't know if any of the other panelists have anything to add, or do you want to open it?
I do.
Okay, yeah.
I don't sound like I'm mic'd to myself.
Yeah.
I am? Great. Okay, so I am Does that give you any idea who I am? So we've been hearing from practitioners in the field. From the scholarly point of view, this will come as no surprise to most people in this room. It is still an effort to convince other scholars and practitioners in the water, sanitation, and hygiene sector that gender matters. I have been called on the carpet for saying that I do feminist research. Oh, well, what is that? Well, it's an understanding that the relationship between men and women is an unequal one and has outcomes for health. What? How could that possibly be? But we know that is so, and I certainly know from my own experience, and again you do too, that making the feminist case is one that has to be made over and over again, regardless of context.
Thank you. Do you have anything to add, Jacob? Okay. How about we take some questions from the audience, since we only have about 7 minutes. Any questions?
So mine's from Ms. Evans. So you said
Oh, she's bringing a microphone.
Hello. Okay. So in the areas where like the water was closer, so when you put in local water, and you talked about how like women started growing their own crops, did that change like how they? I guess they were adding to the local economy. Did that change like the domestic sphere with like even in the households? I mean, I know all households didn't have like men and women in both of them, but like did that change like the relationship between men and women in the domestic sphere?
It did, and it always does. It's not always a graceful transition. But what we've found going back into the same community over the years is that the men are starting to understand that that's the way that it's going to be. And the women are starting to seem a lot more empowered about getting their kids to school and putting their foot down about that being a priority for them. So it really is changing. And to be fair, you know, I'm not living out there with them 24/7 all year round. We have heard stories that, you know, there's been some struggle in accepting this new dynamic. Overall, though, we're seeing really great progress. That's a good question.
Any other questions? Oh.
I have a quick question. Way back here in the back. My question is about this notion or this idea or this data that says that when you give money to women, that the money goes back into the families and the communities, but when you give it to men, it's a smaller percentage actually returns to their families and communities. What do men do with the money?
So, I'm happy to take a stab at that. I've been told, no, I have a friend who, no, research that I've seen suggests that it goes into things that you might not be too surprised about. It goes into alcohol and other vices, and it goes into other activities like that. It's not invested in things, you know, it's not invested in uniforms, school fees, health and medical expenses and those kinds of things. It's spent on other more consumer-based goods as opposed to long-term investments.
There's sort of this cultural dynamic where the women do all of the work and the men are the protectors. So they have the one role and then women take care of everything else. So when there's funding available, if it's in the hands of the men who don't have to do the work, they don't understand the value of putting it toward mitigating those burdens.
Thank you. Did you have a question?
Professor O'Reilly, how does the caste system in India affect access to public toilet? Let's say Brahmins and the Dalits, the untouchables, for example.
The urban and the rural case are somewhat different, but if we simply understand the caste system as a social hierarchy that persists through Hindu and also Muslim communities, the strain for those in lowest caste communities is greater for those in upper caste communities. That seems to be less of a gap in rural areas because open defecation grounds are generally need to be near to the villages and may not be separated by caste. Sometimes they are, sometimes they aren't. In the case of urban India, it is more a question of class, in which middle class Indians do not want community toilets built for those living in informal settlements, because it means that they will become permanent residents in those places. And given the connection between caste and class in India, those who are middle class and upper middle class in urban areas tend to be upper caste, and those who are living in informal settlements or slums are lower caste or Dalits.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question.
No, my question is, I come from Ecuador, South America, and when I I had done some work up in the Andes in Ecuador. And what I noticed is throughout the Andes, in both Ecuador, Peru, and Bolivia, you have pretty much the same thing. But it's all obviously it's among the Indians, you know, the natives. And they have the challenge, the same challenge that they have to the women and the men, you know, go out. And so my question is, have anybody had done any study, have you done any study also in Latin America about this? Has anybody?
Not that I am aware of, but let's talk so we can do it.
I'm game.
Great. Talk to you at lunch.
Okay.
Okay, so we're just about out of time unless there's one more quick question. No? Yes? Yeah.
Who's Mary?
Mary, the mother of Jesus, was the inspiration for the founding of the organization. Yeah. Which is, I don't think, incidental, at least in terms of the focus on women and girls, for that matter, and the opportunity that provides.
Okay, well, thank you very much to our panel. You all are obviously doing very significant work and impacting the lives of women. And thank you to the audience for interacting. So we are out of time.